My fellow prophecy student, greetings. Some time ago, I saw a certain comment under one of my Sunday law videos stating something to the effect that the teaching of an impending national Sunday law is not biblical because it is not mentioned in the Bible. This comment strikes me as a typical illustration of how people determine what is Bible-based and what is not. As it seems, in this person's estimation, anything that is not stated in the Bible is not biblical, and because the phrase Sunday law is not found in the scriptures, it has no biblical basis. But is this a valid way to judge whether a teaching is biblical or not? If you should look at some New Testament references to Old Testament prophecies, you would wonder how on earth could these New Testament Bible writers arrive at certain conclusions. For example, Matthew, in reference to the experience of baby Jesus, where his parents had to flee with him to Egypt in order to escape Herod's onslaught on all the boy babies in Israel, made the following remarks. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. Matthew 2:13-15. This statement is a clear reference to a passage found in Hosea 11 and verse 1. But when you examine this statement, you will see that it was neither a prophecy, nor was it referring to Christ as that son. The mention of son in the context surrounding the verse was originally referring to Israel. If we should judge this scenario by our own standards, it would mean that Matthew is engaged in private interpretation of Old Testament prophets. But this is clearly an inspired conclusion from utterances that appear unrelated, but when deeply examined, we can see why Matthew arrived at that conclusion, and there are other such cases in the scriptures. Therefore, the conclusions Bible writers arrive at by inspiration, Bible students are able to arrive at by logical deduction. I would place the Sunday law issue in pretty much the same category, in that while it is not readily discerned in Bible prophecy, it can easily be deduced by comparing both biblical and historical data, as well as by observing current developments around the world. First, we will examine the Sabbath issue, and this is especially important in light of assertions that the Sabbath is done away with and the 10 Commandments abolished. As a Sabbath keeper, I notice that whenever the issue of the Sabbath is raised, it tends to breed controversy and cause some to think of it as an attempt by its adherents to indoctrinate. I have seen this trend over and over again in different exchanges with Sunday keepers. I am saying this to say that, like all the other videos I did on this subject, this is not designed to be a means of attacking my Sunday keeping brethren. I am just going to tell you of my experience concerning a particular Bible passage that helped to convince me of the perpetuity of the Sabbath. As a part of my love affair with Bible prophecy, the prophetic utterances by Jesus Christ in Matthew 24 was my third most read prophecy in the entire Bible beside Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. I read that chapter all the time and did not stop to notice a particular verse until years later in my prophecy studies. Here's the verse I'm talking about. But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Matthew 24 and verse 20. At first glance, this verse seems to teach that it was only to the Jewish Christians that this admonition applies. After all, the prophecy is supposed to be about the destruction of Jerusalem, which was fulfilled in the second half of the 1st century, AD 70. Assuming that it applies to the Jews, this verse is still significant, since conventional opinion has it that the Sabbath was abolished at the cross and was not supposed to be kept by 1st century Christians. But here is it that Jesus is telling them that in the future, Sabbath keeping will still be binding, and so binding and sacred will it be then that the Christian should pray that they don't have to take their flight on that day. Get the point I'm trying to make? Why should Christians pray that they do not desecrate that which is abolished? But does this prophecy apply only to first century Jewish Christians? We need to understand that this prophecy in Matthew 24 has a dual application. It is what you could call a proleptic prophecy, in that it is applicable to both the destruction of Jerusalem and the second coming of Christ. In that case, wouldn't the Sabbath be applicable in both fulfillments of the prophecy? The verse that follows provides the answer for me, as it relates to the point in time when this flight is supposed to take place. Here's what it says: For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Matthew 24, verse 21. When I tie both verses together, I cannot help but conclude that the time when the Christians are to take their flight will be a time of great distress that was never seen before, and the likes of which will never be repeated at any time in the future. The only time that I can think of that fits that description is the great time of trouble spoken of by the prophet Daniel in the following declaration: And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Daniel 12 and verse 1. If the Sabbath will still be binding at that point in Earth's history, then we need to visualize its implication on the issue of worship during the reign of the Antichrist in the last days. If the Bible teaches that this end-time enemy of Christ will exalt himself above all that is called God and all that is worshipped, then we can hardly ignore its effects on the present Sabbath Sunday worship arrangement in the Christian tradition. It is just a matter of connecting the dots, and the ability to connect the dots in end-time prophecy is what makes the difference between an ordinary prophecy student and an advanced prophecy student. Let us now take a look at the Sunday issue. Where the Sunday law issue is concerned, I cannot say that it is biblical in the popular sense of being mentioned in the scriptures, but I would rather say that it is a scripturally valid proposition. In light of clear biblical and historical facts, one can hardly deny the viability of this teaching. Here's an example. In the Bible, it is prophesied that after the kingdom of the Medes and Persians came off the scene, a mighty king of Greece would rise. If one should conclude beforehand that the Bible predicted the rise of Alexander the Great, that would be considered unscriptural because his name is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Daniel. But it is a fact that Alexander the Great was indeed that king. Thus, the lack of mention in the Bible is not necessarily an accurate means of measuring the truth or falsity of a doctrine. The Sunday law issue is pretty much in the same category. The assertion on the part of its advocates is that an international Sunday law will be enacted in the last days and will become a major issue in the final conflict between good and evil. On the basis that it cannot be claimed that Sunday law is mentioned in the Bible, does it mean it has no foundation in Bible prophecy? As I alluded to earlier, a lack of biblical mention of a phrase or terminology that describes a particular teaching does not necessarily make it false. Our first step in establishing the biblical validity of a Sunday law in the last days takes us to Daniel 7. In this chapter, a prophecy was given of the succession of world kingdoms leading up to the end of the world. These kingdoms are symbolized by 4 beasts. In describing the 4th beast, the prophet Daniel declared that he has 10 horns. As the scene unfolds, a little horn was seen emerging, at the rise of which 3 of the 10 horns fell. Thus the Bible went on to describe the activities of this little horn. 1. He blasphemes the name of God. 2. He persecutes the saints. 3. He rules for 1,260 days. And 4. He thinks to change times and laws. It must be noted that this little horn is a power that came to prominence after the old Roman Empire was divided into 10 kingdoms. There is no doubt that the entity that came to power at that point in time, fulfilling all of the above specifications, was the papacy or the Roman Catholic Church. The pages of both sacred and secular history can eloquently attest to this. Therefore, whatever is described in the prophecy concerning this little horn must be identified as a specification that marks the history of the Roman papacy. For the purpose of this video, we are going to focus on only one of the specifications listed above. He thinks to change times and laws. That this is a clear reference to the tampering with the laws of God is validated in the parallel prophecies of chapter 8 and 11. In chapter 8, it is said that the king of fierce countenance will cast the truth to the ground and trample upon it. Psalms 119 and verse 142 says, "Thy law is the truth." When you read Daniel chapter 11, it says that the king of the north will have indignation against the Holy Covenant, the 10 Commandments, and pollute the sanctuary. Was not this the case during the reign of the papacy? Absolutely, most certainly yes. It is a historical fact that the papacy did tamper with the 10 Commandments as stated in the Bible. Yes, they rewrote the Decalogue in order to legitimize the worship of idols of Mary and dead saints, and to establish Sunday as the Sabbath. And yes, they went ahead and enacted laws to enforce Sunday as a day of worship on the pain of death. If somebody had forecasted that there would be a Sunday law at that time, that would be considered unbiblical, isn't it? Yet, it would be true. Now, here's something interesting. The Roman Catholic Church is so proud of their blasphemous presumption against God's holy laws, the covenant, that they boasted about being the author of its change. Here is a sample of their own statement. Quote, "Sunday is our mark of authority. The church is above the Bible, and this transference of Sabbath observance is proof of that fact." End of quote. This is taken from the Catholic Record, London, Ontario, September 1, 1923. Therefore, if Sunday keeping is considered the mark of papal authority, then it stands to reason that where the authority of the papacy is re-established, most naturally it would be followed by the restoration of the mark of that authority. From this observation, it is certainly not unreasonable to conclude that just as there were Sunday laws during the medieval reign of the Roman Church, there will be Sunday laws when her supremacy is restored. In other words, under a future Roman Catholic regime, the status quo will return to what it was during the Dark Ages. And to top it off, we have papal bishops and successive popes actively calling for Sunday laws in our day. Isn't that saying something to you about the real intention of the Catholic Church when they regain ecclesiastical power? The End Time Prophecy e-course deals with the Sabbath Sunday issue in light of its connection to the end time prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. It speaks about the subject in different sections as a matter that is more than just a choice between two worship days. The Mark of the Beast issue will essentially be about an end-time battle between the Lord of the Sabbath and the God of Sunday. And that is precisely how the Sabbath Sunday issue will become a major focus in the last days. To download this revolutionary prophecy study, go to www.prophecyecourse.com. I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.